Great. Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ATARC Cloud and Coffee discussion on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and absent today is my dynamic co-host, Bill Hunt. Bill has recently taken on a new role at the Securities and Exchange Commission and is waiting for clearance to rejoin us. Before the introductions, again, this platform is hosted under the ATARC Cloud and Infrastructure pillar with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guest experiences, past, present, and executing modernization and transformation efforts. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the chat, so please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A section, and we'll work those questions into our discussion. Now let's move on to introductions. Today our guest is Brian Whittaker with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And he's no stranger to transformation projects or organizations. Brian, would you mind sharing with the audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks so much for that introduction. So I'm Brian Whittaker, Director of Design and Development at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. How did I get here? So my career started off in industry. I worked at Lockheed for quite a bit, transitioned to consulting with Grant Thornton, and actually started consulting with GSA. My client at the time had asked me, hey, have you taken any business classes? I'm like, yeah, sure. He was like, well, how many? I'm like, I got my MBA. What do you want? He's like, well, I've got this opportunity. We're looking for contract specialists. And I made my way into government. What I hadn't realized at the time, first off, I've got a lot of sisters. I've got a sister that's a cop, a nurse, a teacher. My dad was Air Force. My mom was a teacher. So public service was in my blood. So I got into government, focused on getting my hands on some government-wide work. Sure enough, that turned into starting an organization called the IT Modernization Centers of Excellence. I was employee number 2 and helped grow that organization to about 40 people. Transitioned to another organization in GSA called 18F, which is about 100-person federal consultancy. Started up a few administrations back, helping out with addressing healthcare.gov, and transitioned from there in August of last year to CFPB. So that's the Cliff Note version of where I'm at.
Excellent. Yeah, and CFPB being one of the first organizations to stand up in the cloud when they started, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of a uniqueness. Before you got there, it was almost had a calling for you, yeah?
100%, and it worked out really nicely. They're about a 10-year-old organization, and I'm currently leading one of the early organizations of remote work. So my team's currently 45 people, all virtual, and they were definitely at the forefront of that movement.
Excellent, excellent. Well, with that background, we had a little chat, and I'd really like to start with your comment around one of our favorite topics on this show is change, and you had kind of identified the theory of change from many views, and within those different organizations, obviously progressive in nature of the government, but quite honestly in the industry as a whole, right? The way that those organizations. So would love to hear, kind of your views on the theory of change.
Oh, sure. I really had a great opportunity to learn a lot about change through my experience at GSA. I'd say first with the Centers of Excellence within GSA, we were an initiative stood up by the White House. So I don't think you can get more top-down approach than that. The White House worked with us to identify partner agencies that would work with us on modernization. While I was in the organization, we specifically worked with 5, USDA, HUD, OPM, Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the DoD. But at USDA, I believe is where I saw this done the best. Secretary Perdue at the time actually put forth an IT modernization memo, in collaboration with the CIO at the time, Gary Washington. And one of the things that he did, he specifically quantified the number of servers that they wanted consolidated within the fiscal year, which really made it easy for us as Fed-to-Fed consultants to come in and justify why we're here, right? And I think the great thing about his approach was he defined what he wanted, but he allowed the subject matter experts across the department to come up with the how, right? So it was very clear what the end goal was, and it was you couldn't say you didn't know, right? We kept that memo in hand wherever we went. But transitioning from the Centers of Excellence to 18F, 18F's model is completely different. They're more so focusing on change from the ground up, right? Making sure that you have the people bought in, the ideas from the people, and floating that up the chain to actually get it implemented, right? And their model is definitely one of we're not going to fish for you the entire time. We'll fish for you at the beginning. We'll teach you how to fish. You'll be fishing on your own, and then we're out of here. So that presents its own challenges as well, with the bottom-up approach. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really get things done, and a lot of it revolves around messaging, right? CPB is awesome in that they provided me with a career coach, not just me, but anyone that wants one, at a certain grade level. But the coach said something that stuck with me that's really made me think about this bottom-up approach, and that's speaking to your audience's audience, right? If I have an idea, how do I message that idea in a way that my leadership can then convey it to their leadership, which I think is one of those golden keys to success from that bottom-up approach.
So it's interesting because you not only had the change within your organization, and two of those organizations you brought that change to other organizations, right? As almost that advisory capacity. But in that, what were some of the kind of the key tenets to kind of rolling in as the subject matter experts, the advisors, right? Because it is a tough role to play, because to your point of, we'll teach you to fish a little bit in the beginning, but it's ultimately we're going to let you run with it after. It's a big role, and it definitely is a different role inside the government.
100%. I think there's a lot of, I'll start with 18F, but there's a lot of narrative out there, and government has a really long memory. There's a lot of discussion out there about the 18F of old, and not necessarily having the empathy of the government employee situation. So in recent times, I'd say 18F has done an amazing job of working towards changing and addressing that through their hiring practices. So one of the things that I noticed while leading 18F, subject matter experts would come in curious and humble and wanting to learn and understand where their government partners at, developing a respect for their expertise, and then shaping the conversation around, let's pair your legal expertise with my content expertise, and we can create great information for the citizen, right? So having that collaborative, humble, curious approach about what your government partner is dealing with and working on and their priorities, I think was definitely the key to success there. At the Centers of Excellence, there was a very inclusive approach as well. Specifically at USDA, in collaboration with Gary Washington, we stood up a competitive detailee leadership development program where each of the divisions within the entire Department of USDA were able to have their IT employees submit their resume for a 2-year-long detail opportunity to modernize the department, right? So we actually got talent from across the entire department that knew the ins and outs, knew how things worked, knew who to talk to, who was more open to getting to yes rather than those that were a little bit averse. And they really helped us accelerate through the learning curve at that massive department, right? And not only did they help show us the ropes and help us understand the culture and the nuance of processes at the department, we also showed them some modern management techniques and best practices, human-centered design, design thinking, agile, right? So it was a mutually beneficial situation. And not to mention in a department so large as USDA, having the opportunity to actually work at the department CIO level, it was exciting. So their energy, our energy, you put it together, and I think that's part of the reason why USDA achieved so much success.
Yeah, and I mean, you've seen that success in their FATAR scores, everything, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's been a huge play for their you know or testament for their success is actually seeing the results, right? The actual metrics. One of the things that that you did, you and I chatted about previously, and to use one of Bill's, let's dive a little bit deeper in kind of the human-centered design. Part of that is you mentioned, modernization kind of goes hand in hand with culture change, right? So
Mhm.
you obviously brought, in that situation, you brought together people from all over an organization to impact change. How was the culture shift beyond the groups that kind of volunteered to come
Oh, it was, I won't say it was easy, but I will say there were some great lessons learned through the collaboration with USDA. Um, One of those things, and is a common phrase, but I think USDA really lived this value and this lesson learned, and that's trust but verify. Right? So when we started at USDA, we were in the CIO shop, right? And we were looking for a customer experience project.
in?
And when we asked USDA about, what their customers wanted, the initial reaction was they want us to automate everything. They want everything completely digital. Um, and fortunately, with some leading edge leaders at USDA, they're like, well, hold on. Why don't we give these folks a chance to actually speak to some farmers, ranchers, and producers? And thanks to that fearless leader and forward-leaning leader, we were able to do over 80 interviews at 60 different states of farmers, ranchers, producers. And what we learned was they didn't want everything to go digital. They didn't want everything automated. They had long-standing relationships with the people that worked at their local USDA offices. Their grandfather's friend of 2 decades or so, and they wanted to keep those ties going. So what we actually did was we did recognize that there was one part of the overall USDA interaction that they did want modernized, and that was the farm loans process.
Oh,
Right? So working with the CIOs there, the deputy CIOs, um, we were able to create a few prototypes and then also forms to guide people through the farm loan process, right? Making sure that they were applying for the right one and they knew which one was best suited for their needs. And then, I mean, gosh, this was 2019, 2020. How long have we been doing loans online, whether it's
right.
through our phone or actually on our laptop? So to be able to work with USDA and have USDA to help position USDA to bring that to bear for farmers and ranchers was amazing. But I do believe USDA is further bought into human-centered design, actually reaching out to the people that are going to use the tech and bringing that information back to create a product that's actually going to be used and it solves the right problem.
So that was actually in a design situation.
Mhm.
It's interesting because I always find the human-centered design is something that the human element really is involved in any of the modernization efforts, right? So
Mhm.
if you move to cloud, there's a human impact, right? There's what we call it. Workforce, we always talk through the emotional side of change, and people have heard that on this on this show before. You know, can you talk to, as you get into um, all these changes, right? Again, kind of looking at the top down, bottoms up. Is it situational? Is it organizational? Like, how have you kind of, again, adapted to the different situations that you've gone into?
Oh yeah. So I would say I think it's both organizational and situational, right? Organizational, I think there's an opportunity for leadership and organizations to be as transparent as possible throughout the change. Something that I adapted and picked up from 18F is the ask me anything. It can be a little bit frightening as a leader to have 100 different people on a call and actually not know all of the questions that they're going to ask you, but having them see you do your best and share as much as you can, I think goes a long way to addressing the challenges of emotional change, right? Not knowing what's happening next, what's going to change about my job, a shift in mindset of how you add value, right? And making sure that as a leader in an organization, your leadership is making themselves available to coach people through this and be collaborative in regards to figuring out, I think goes a long way. And then the situational aspects of that, I think there are a variety of ways. Let's say we're going to transition some applications to the cloud. How do you support your organization through that situation? Your entire organization doesn't necessarily need AWS or Azure training. How do you make sure that the people that are going through this change feel supported on a variety of fronts? Whether it's the leadership, right? How do you collaborate with the leadership to develop, let's say, frequently asked questions that they can expect, so they feel prepared to answer some of the difficult questions around what change is coming? When it comes to the workforce, do they have the training? Do they have examples or stories of why this change has worked, either internal to that department or external? Are you positioning them with mentors so that as they're going through the change and doing the work and hitting roadblocks, is there someone they can call? Is there a reference available? So I think depending on the organization's transparency and the situation of the change, I think you've got to make sure you provide the appropriate amount of support.
So, you know, that to dig a little on that as well, we've had folks on the show ask questions around, you know, small moves that they're making to the cloud. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is, you know, if depending on the leadership might determine kind of the level of detail that you might need to provide up the chain, right? So if you're the individual that is been tasked with it, don't expect that everybody above you understands all of the, you know, ins and outs of the cloud environment that you're moving into, et cetera. And when we talked before, I thought it was really interesting, and you talk a lot, and I think this is where you and I've connected in the past, is that involvement. So there's a learning curve, right? So especially if you're kind of the, you know, the person that is the subject matter expert on something, you know, the learning curve might be different. And so you had some real advice on kind of that, you know, getting people involved, so to speak. Can you provide some examples that you kind of really run into that situation?
Sure. So, you know, getting folks involved from that learning curve, you know, I think there's multiple ways to look at this, right? If you're doing something for the first time, um, how do you get in touch with someone that has done what you're trying to do and was successful at it? You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. Um, Not every problem is completely unique at this point in the majority of government instances, right? Someone else out there has gone down the path that you have. Uh, what's your strategy to get in touch with someone like that? Um, what is your opportunity to save time and actually take some of those best practices and implement those. I'd say that's definitely one. The other aspect of accelerating through that learning curve is, I feel like organizations like these, there's something about government that I think is starting to change, but I find to be a little bit on the challenging side is I find the majority of folks are a little bit uncomfortable talking about their challenges. And I feel like if more people spoke about them, we'd recognize that those aren't unique and we could share ideas and trade. And like, I'm grateful for organizations like ATARC that focus on bringing IT leaders together to have these sort of conversations. And that's another way to sort of accelerate through the curve. And then speaking to a bunch of the developers in my team, we've had conversations around their specific approach of how they hop into problems, right? Do they go and sign up for an online course and work through it from the beginning to the end, or do they hop right in the middle and then just learn out, right? Are they using Google? Are they phoning friends? Are they getting into the forums and whatnot to tackle the specific problems? So I think there's a variety of approaches, but I think more often than not, and maybe this just could be my collaborative leadership style or the fact that I'm an extrovert, but I'm going to talk to somebody first before I dig in and start trying to reinvent the wheel. But that's just my style.
Right. No, and it is interesting for those that might be new to the show. We've talked about it before. There is the DCCOI PMO out of GSA that is focused on really trying to bring those lessons learned. We ATARC partner with them. Tom Santucci, who leads that group, is on our ATARC pillar, and that is important, right? And I think that is one of the biggest things that needs to happen. Is there are experiences, there are lessons learned that people have, kind of going from situation to situation. May not be what they're doing in the current environment, but definitely is a key area to kind of getting to move towards it. So I got a question here, Jim. Sorry, I'm gonna read through it so that way everybody gets to it. But ultimately, the Bureau created the Technology and Innovation Organizational Change Management team 2 years ago to focus on improving end user experience of technology rollouts. Is this still in place? This sounds like application development that begins with a humanistic approach. Is there a common platform CFPB uses in their app development? Has CFPB brought their DevOps together to continuously build, run, and manage apps? And Jim, I think Brian's been tagging a lot of his experience from different organizations, but I don't know if there's some of this, Brian, that you can touch on.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the Bureau did stand up the Technology and Innovation Organization. That's the one that I'm in. And the change management team is still alive and well in TNI as well. So that's good news. They are working with TNI and the other parts of the Bureau to support the other parts of the Bureau through technology change. I know right before I arrived, the Bureau rolled out Teams, and the change management organization was critical to the adoption of that across the Bureau. So yep, that's still in place. And then it looks like the next question, application development that begins with the humanistic approach. Yes, so specifically within my team, design and development, we do have a user experience and a user research team. So we get out there and do discovery, talk to the people that are most in need of an application, and make sure we bake that in into our development. And we include these stakeholders in our sprints, so they get to see our progress and review where we are and make sure we're going down the right path as we work. And then the last question, has CPB brought their dev and ops together to continuously build, run, and manage apps? Yes, DevOps is alive and well, specifically related to the consumer finance website. So we are we've got our CI/CD pipelines up and running, and my team actually did a nice demo of that for me a couple months ago, and we were actually able to share some of our best practices with a few application development teams at the Smithsonian. So I hope I answered the majority of those questions.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Brian, for Jim. Thanks for the multi-part question there. And so, so it is again, I think if you're looking at the evolution, right, of technology and how we're trying to tie it in, and I think UI and Bill are in sync when it comes to the overall again that human element. One of the things that and I'm not trying to poke too many pokers at this group, but one of the things that does kind of create challenges is the acquisition side. So obviously you came in a unique position, have moved through the different organizations, but how do you best work with acquisitions to do some of the pieces that that you need to in kind of a modernization transformation effort?
Wow. There were a lot of lessons learned through the centers of excellence as it pertains to acquisition. And it wasn't easy, definitely wasn't easy. But one of the big lessons learned for me in the majority of those collaborations with partner agencies was really embedding the acquisition team with the technologists. I'd say it was very, very hard to find someone that is an expert in the far and also an expert in the vast world of tech. So if you don't have those people together, truly understanding needs, truly understanding outcomes, and learning how to speak each other's language, there's going to be a lot of risk in that acquisition. An acquisition person might infer something about tech that just isn't accurate, and things could start going astray. And also, gosh, I mean, a tech person doesn't know the far. The magic that they think an acquisition person could do could lead to extreme amounts of frustration. So, government is an industry, there's different requirements, but some of the best outcomes that I had seen were when the two organizations, tech experts, acquisition experts, really came together to create a contract that works. While I was at the Centers of Excellence, we stood up a blanket purchase agreement, and I know it wasn't the most active, but I think the way that we engaged with industry really captured their pain points and needs, and also addressed the pain points and needs of the government, right? We used Google Forms, we used assessments to assess industry's capabilities in a phased approach, right? And we weren't asking for 20, 30-page long proposals that were time consuming, requiring all the partners, all the business development teams, and multiple hours and resources. We made sure we did this in small chunks to assess their expertise and capabilities. And I think they definitely welcomed the approach. I think the only thing that I would say after the fact is, we stood up that BPA with certain assumptions around funding available of our partner agencies, our own hourly rates, right? And bringing those two together to actually make an affordable modernization effort proved to be truly challenging, which really made it hard for more activity to go to that BPA. But I do feel that the way we assessed industry, the collaboration between the tech experts and the acquisition experts led to a really great experience for industry and competing for it, and also a very sound BPA. So that collaboration is key.
Yeah, and I think you've used that example too, and just because a lot of times it's at pace, right? You know,
Mhm.
the challenge with tech, whether it be product or service right now, is are you able to do it at pace, right? That you're not, you know, you're not stuck in an 18-month procurement cycle, and then you know the potential protest, and then next thing you know, you're you know 3 to 4 years behind, and you know, and technology has changed. And I think you used an example where you were able to do something at you know at pace because of bringing the different organizations together. And um, you know, I think you tie on kind of the key part. And I guess one thing I'll ask you, and not that you're you know from an acquisition expertise standpoint, but you know the FAR pieces, right? It's the same kind of uh, analogy that you used earlier, right? If you're the tech SME trying to make a change, it's that education, right? And I think that's a piece that does get left a little bit, right? And it gets a little left behind because everybody else is running so fast. So, I mean, are there enough folks that you know in the you know in the acquisition world and in your experience on the modernization pieces that you know also understand what the FAR impacts would be? Have you seen people that are
So
getting educated?
I would say there are programs that are helping move this along. The DITAP acquisition training program is one of the best that I've seen that actually brings contracting officers from across the government together into, I think it might be 2 to 3 months long of training where you're getting to hear from the tech folks that have worked with acquisition for great outcomes. You're getting to hear about what perceived limitations that the FAR, provides and how they aren't actually true, where there are strategies that allow for you to account for certain risks and improved outcomes by creating a statement of objectives. A statement of objectives. So there is a wave coming of contracting officers that are. I don't want to make it sound like they are FAR and tech experts, but I'll say they're experts in the FAR, and let's say they're tech affiliated, right? They have the chops. They know the people to sort of talk to about tech to really get you what you need and the know-how. So I've seen the improvements on that front, but I think the more that the tech experts in organizations work with acquisition and not just throw their needs over the fence, I think they'll continue to build that bridge and not have such a big gap between tech language, acquisition language, and coming together and make great outcomes.
All right. So we've got another question here from Ed, and I'm actually going to flip it a little bit. You know, again, you're in an organization that moved early to the cloud when they stood up. It was, you know, definitely one of the back in the cloud first days. I'll use that because Bill's not here to make sure that I use Cloud Smart. But back in the cloud first days, it was one of those first organizations that you know, as it was being stood up, focused on the cloud. The you know the security side of things, right? That was I back then. I remember you know that was the cloud security was still kind of something new because it was you know advancing just past when you know FedRAMP was rolling out. So there was a lot that was kind of coming together all at the same time. So we'll start with Ed's question around speaking of DevOps and best practices. How to, you know, how have you been involved and how do you go about securing the software supply chain?
Sure. So that's a great question. And I wish I had a more robust answer, but from what I've seen specifically within the Bureau is, you know, we use a container strategy for our DevOps, and we also have access to trusted registries for those container softwares and whatnot. So we've really leaned on those to actually ensure that what we're using is secure and are also scanning for vulnerabilities at a regular cadence. But I mean, gosh, if you want a more robust, in-depth answer than that, I won't try to pretend, Ed. I'm not the one, but
Ed gave you props. He was hoping, that's what he was hoping to hear. Just for the audience, we did tell Brian that he wouldn't have to code anything or get on and be too technical. So I do, but it is interesting, right? Because I think in your approach in the organizations that you've been a part of, I do think security as a whole needs to be one of those elements, right? I mean, it needs to be discussed more and more. And it is shocking that in today's environment, it still is something that sometimes is left off to the side. Oh, that's the security team versus everybody looking at. Is that something that you're starting to see more and more as you've moved through, again, some of these transformational groups?
100%. And, for the last 3 years, I had the opportunity to work around and consult for CIO shops. And for the first time in my career, I'm actually in one, right? And the amount of empathy that I've developed for CISOs in government, wow. Okay. There's nothing, I think there's nothing wrong with saying, like, you see a job and you know that's one you don't want. They are often pinned in the position of, the office of no, right? But I think there is an opportunity for a cultural shift, right? Where security can be included early and often. So at the point that you come to the CISO or the cybersecurity organization with an ask, you aren't so far down the road that the brakes have to get pumped and further assessment needs to take place before you can move forward. So another great opportunity for, even within its own tech shop, greater collaboration with cybersecurity early on to ensure we're making the right moves. And not only from a tech perspective, an acquisition perspective. How many things can go through a P card purchase that aren't reviewed by cybersecurity that need to be, right? Like, how do we get that baked in earlier in the thought process to make sure that as a department, we're making the right move? So definitely feel for the CISOs, have a lot of empathy for them. But yeah, cultural change, we're definitely ready for it there.
Yeah, and it's needed, right? If we're going to move at pace, everybody has to be involved and understand those impacts. So
yeah,
I'm going to tie back. We've got a question here in the chat, which I think is interesting because of when you started. But can you talk about how you formed the Center of Excellence? So being the number 2 guy in, how did you identify the right people? What were some of the kind of early and midterm objectives, and also did you have physical space or work virtually? So maybe, which I think is probably on everybody's mind at any organization is, how do you identify the right people to include?
Oh yeah, this is one of the most fun things about the Centers of Excellence. And one thing I'll add is I couldn't have done any of this without the TTS talent team. So TTS basically has a very small but mighty recruiting arm. It's about 3 people, and these folks were amazing. I mean, they were great at one using a TTS website called Join TTS to really put a lot of the role descriptions on the website in plain language. And not only did they do that to really help candidates through, they also did a great job of speaking to the opportunity. I mean, coming into government to use your tech and consulting skills to really help modernize and push a department forward. That's exciting, once in a lifetime opportunity. In addition to that, they also were great about keeping in touch with candidates throughout the hiring process. We all know government hiring's hard. It could take anywhere from like 2 to 3 months from contact to actually getting in seat or virtual seat, right? That's not common with industry. So they were great about keeping in touch, letting them know where they were in the process, about how many more days. But in regards to identifying the right people, very early on in the Centers of Excellence, we were definitely in startup mode. The White House and the tech leadership there and tech leadership in GSA really helped co-create what the focus areas would be. So we identified about 5, and that was contact center, customer experience, cloud, IT infrastructure, so think servers, and then data analytics. So in interviewing those people, we looked for folks that were high on empathy and technical aptitude. So they would have about 2 different interviews, one that was a technical one, and then another that was, how comfortable are you working with senior leadership? How do you lead teams? How do you work through difficult conversations with people in response? So we really wanted to make sure that people had the technical chops and the empathy to really understand our partner agency situations and work with them through those challenges. So I think that's the first 2.
As you brought, so let me dive into that one. I want to spend a little time on that one because we talk a lot about on here, the reskilling, right? So as an organization changes, and we talked a lot about that, you've got the culture piece, but the reskilling and empathy is a good one. You might have the technical chops, but can you go into an organization and let people vent, right, to get to that? Were there folks maybe that were internal that came over that might have needed reskilling in either side, right? Maybe additional help on the tech, because I'd be shocked if 100% of what who you recruited was was what came in, but it might have been, hey, this is somebody that's got the passion to work. We just need to, So was that something that also was looked at?
Oh, 100%, and it wasn't perfect. As these centers of excellence began to bring on more partner agencies, I started off as like one of the, let's say, 6 or 7 people that came from GSA to support USDA, right? So until we got another partner agency, the majority of my time was spent there. And while I had transitioned from a consulting and industry background, I had worked with a few folks from GSA on this USDA project that hadn't necessarily come straight from industry. Were they amazing subject matter experts in their domain? Yes. So some of my job was just thought partnership in coaching. How do we influence? What are the appropriate what's the appropriate messaging or leadership chains that we should really talk to or bring into a meeting to really get the outcomes that we were looking for, or at least to build their trust in us to allow us to take a chance. So some of my role was coaching on those fronts, more so on the consultative, not so on the tech, right? But one of the things that did help, after we got our first acquisitions through, we had some of that technical backup through the industry partners that we worked with, right? So that's sort of how we offset and positioned our centers of excellence leads, not only from a consultative standpoint, but also from the technical.
Okay, great. All right, so moving into the second part of the question here, how did, or what are some of the early and midterm objectives that the COE had, which I think, quite honestly, not for the center, but I think even for the, it was to your point, what is the audience's audience going to think, right? And that's really how you guys had to think with those objectives. So any of these objectives would be good for anybody that's looking to make impact and change inside of their organization as well.
Oh yeah, so there were a couple different ways that I would sort of look at this question, right? And when you're in the thick of it, when you're dealing with the White House pressure, when IT modernization is the key, and you're transitioning from being in a project to that executive role, there's sort of 2 things going on at once. Ensuring that the program that you're standing up is actually modernizing, and then also standing up an organization that will last, right? So that's the part of the job that they aren't necessarily talking to you about. What they really want to hear is, what are you doing at this agency? How's it going at this one? But yet structuring and positioning the organization for longevity, that was mainly where I sat, right? So we've gone from 2 people to 7 people to 40 people. Okay, we have 40 people at 5 different agencies at one time. How are we doing this? I remember working with a specific industry partner who did a retrospective with us. They said, hey, we've been here for about 6 months. Are you interested in hearing, what we've noticed, what we've seen, and ways to improve? Of course, I said yes. And the phrase that stuck with me is, the way you're currently operating here, you're operating as the silos of excellence, not the centers of excellence. I was like, okay, wow. So while we're doing all this work, I really need to be focusing on how this organization is structured and operating. So we changed things. We focused on sharing of best practices, right? And this sort of piggybacks into the second question. We had physical space at each of these agencies, and this is when we were in person, at least while I was there, right? What we did was, every 2 weeks, every Friday, we would all get together back at GSA for what we called a home base day, right? We would get all of the customer experience folks at each of the agencies to come together, brief out on what they were doing, what was working, and how they were collaborating with other centers. We brought in different subject matter experts and industry partners. We had GitHub come in one day. The majority of the federal government is running something out of Microsoft, right? We had Microsoft come in and talk about their capabilities and how they're supporting different agencies. So in terms of early and midterm objectives, specifically from the White House, year 1, it was like, make a big splash. Year 2 is like, we need you at 3 more agencies. You were able to meet these goals, but in regards to early and midterm objectives at each of these agencies, our current, our model then, when it came to engaging with the partner agency, the early objective was to collaborate with leadership to identify an area to execute discovery, right? You have these subject matter experts, take a scan of our landscape and tell us what opportunities are available to modernize. And then we would move forward with that. We would move forward and make our recommendation. And if that recommendation was approved, we would go forth and implement. So I know that was a lot of information, but I would say first is to find an opportunity to discover, to do some discovery, and then second would be to implement on that.
Great. No, actually good coverage of those pieces, and thank you for the question. So, it's interesting, right? Because I think that kind of dovetails into your current role, right? Because that was the centers of excellence that still was old school, rolling in suits. I mean, you guys look like the big consultant firms, right? I mean, you came in, give the advisory. At the time, GSA was kind of one of the organizations, again, progressively moving to the cloud. From a email standpoint, and some of the hosting and starting to move virtual, right? They had just redone a couple of the buildings. I think when Center stood up, the building, the 18th building had been redone, and you guys were moving in there. So you had this virtual world happening around an organization. Now you're actually moved to kind of the workforce, work from home type of environment. What have you seen in making sure that you maintain that sort of energy? Because it is hard, right? I mean, you don't have a whiteboard that you're necessarily drawing on. You don't have the talks about the weekend as much as you would. So how are you seeing that shift happen?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a difficult one, but I would say being intentional about the relationship building is key, right? Making sure that you and your partner or your agency partner are on the same page about how part of that is the work, right? I'm even going through it right now, more so on the spectator front and less so on like the facilitator front, where we're engaged with 18F and we're working through collaborating across my team, Office of Public Affairs, consumer education, and talking through, okay, this is what the content approval process was before. Here's what it's going to now. And why is this so important and so necessary? With the exception of myself, these are all new faces. The administration just changed. We haven't built those muscles of collaborating with each other before. So actually making the time to introduce ourselves, talk through what our priorities are, what our pain points are, do a little bit, but not a whole lot of commiserating together, right? And it's definitely helped us get on the same page and see how much we have in common, and how we're all focused on making improvements for our team that better the opportunity for the mission for the Bureau to deliver content. But I'd say, yeah, just being upfront about having these conversations, and how taking the time to get to know each other's priorities truly is the work. Because without that alignment, it's going to be a rocky road of actually either modernizing or collaborating. So baking that in is key.
Yeah. Yeah. No, understood. So we've got a question here. I think this is more just a general, and Michael, I'll read this out, but I think there's also other organizations. I've heard some agencies have purchased their entire cloud stack from the FBI. So they've outsourced their cloud and security mission through the FBI. This sounds like a great way for agencies to not try and reinvent the wheel. Have you heard of it? And I think there's a number of these out there, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
at the center, you probably saw a number of organizations kind of move to that. And I think, Michael, if you dial into if your government, if you dial into the DCCOI calls, you'll hear kind of a move trying to look at data centers. Steve Nallman is a great advocate on what's going on in the data centers and hosting hybrid clouds. Tom Santucci, but I mean, you've seen it from these centers of excellence. So not, maybe not the specific of to the FBI, but in general, there is, I guess, less reinventing going on. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I haven't specifically heard about the FBI offering, but while working with the Centers of Excellence, two to three different platforms that we had recommended and were familiar with were cloud.gov. So that's GSA's offering, right, for their cloud platform. Then you've also got login.gov for authentication services. And then Federalist was another one in regards to web hosting. So yeah, there's a variety of opportunities out there to outsource these needs. And I could see, this FBI offering, cloud.gov offering, being truly beneficial to some of the smaller agencies out there. Rather than standing up an entire shop and managing it on their own, outsourcing some of this capability so that they can be a little bit more nimble. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great offering. Why reinvent the wheel when this is sort of a solved challenge that the government's facing?
Yeah, and DOJs, for those that are new to the show, we've had folks from the department on talking about a lot of their long transformation activities around data center consolidation, application rationalization, some of their cloud. They were an early cloud acquisition organization. So you can check out the YouTube or Spotify and get some lessons learned on what they've done in the past, because they've been pretty progressive in their approaches. So the one thing that I enjoyed about conversations I've had in the past is your view of how to gain momentum. And it actually, I think, is a great discussion that leads into the secret question that I have for you at the end. That is you and my personal debate that we have after our first meeting. But you had a specific way of helping gain momentum, and I don't know if you're going to remember the exact phrasing, but you gain momentum through
Mhm.
storytelling.
I mean, yes, 100%, 100%. I think that is such a underestimated asset to a leadership's toolbox. And I think one of the key drivers of innovation, modernization, and any sort of change, I think building that momentum, it comes from generating those success stories, right? And a lot of this was, not necessarily imposed upon me, but that was my mindset as we're starting to build an IT modernization program. Okay, what is it that we can do at USDA that can be told at other partner agencies to speak to our value, to speak to the change that came from the effort that was put in, right? And telling those stories is key. Not only from getting other people bought in, but also getting people to see themselves in that change, right? Not necessarily positioning the centers of excellence as the superheroes, but it's actually the people within USDA that tried something new, that worked together and came together in ways that they hadn't before, that actually made that change so that others can see themselves doing it too, not just with us, but also as themselves. It's I don't want to say it's so easy to get the technical expertise or a consultant in there, nor having extra federal resources to just dedicate to a specific project. So there's definitely benefit to collaborating, but without telling that story, without getting that information in front of the right people, it's going to be really hard to achieve what your desired outcomes and goals are.
Yeah, and I do think that is critical to everything you've kind of laid out here today, right? Whether it's a top down or bottom up, right? If you're the person that has an idea that wants to drive to a new technology, the objectives need to be there. The understanding what the audience's audience, right? So your leader's leader, or your organization's leadership, being able to build those benefits. And then ultimately being able to tell that story and have others be able to tell that story, I think are critical pieces. So as we kind of come to the end, so this is I warned you I was going to do this because I still think this is a debate that the way you present in one of the very first presentations where you and I met, you threw out one of your favorite music artists, who I think is quite the storyteller, and I'll let you throw out your favorite song, because I thought for sure it came from a different album before you actually threw it out there. Because we have mutual agreement. We have mutual agreement on this person's success. So I'll spoil it with it is Jay-Z, right?
Yes, it is Jay-Z. And the song that I mentioned was Empire State of Mind,
Right,
with Alicia Keys. And the backstory was, being able to bring your full self to work, right? I'm in a meeting with my team, my organization, and we're all doing an icebreaker, sharing information about who our favorite artist is. And based on my comfort level, I was going to throw out a little softball of John Legend, right? But being as authentic as possible, I had to say Jay-Z, Empire State of Mind, because gosh, that's who I am. That is okay. And I'm still a professional and can get a lot of work done. So I know Chris doesn't like the song, but what's your
it's a good one.
Chris?
It actually is a good storytelling song, right? It just and I was impressed. It was from the Blueprint album series, so It just was it was a great one. I thought for sure just the way you looked at things that you would just go with the full blueprint, but it pick the specifics on. So as always, Brian, it was great chatting with you. We're going to have a quick picture for those that attended. Thank you very much. We have an out of cycle one coming up, Nicole, right? Because we did have to cancel right before the holidays. And when is the next date?
The next one is 2 weeks from now. I don't have it up right now.
2 weeks from now, but it's on the Wednesday, right? Not the Thursday.
It should be still on Thursday.
Okay, all right. So we've got
I'll
check out in 2 weeks. Check the ATARC website. Brian, Nicole's going to grab a quick picture for social media.
All right, and give me a second. I got a chat in the way. I don't want to get that. Okay, and 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Great, Brian. Thank you, everyone that attended. Thank you, Nicole. As always, I really appreciate all the help and work that goes into this. And everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.
Take care.